Has anyone ever actually told you that your own child's or grandchild's developing brain might potentially have some kind of serious factory defect? There are a vast number of parents and grandparents who I know experience a tightening sensation in their stomach and a lump in their throat every single time a doctor brings up or mentions those four letters, ADHD, because to them it feels like it might be a lifelong sentence and a future of pills for the child, just so they will be able to sit still. But look, today I'm here to tell you something that probably no one has explained to you. It turns out the child doesn't have a defective brain. It's more likely that what they have is simply a bio-conductivity problem. Their internal wires are sparking or simply have interference, and that can be resolved without pills. I know that talking about wires might sound strange to you, but think about it. An electrocardiogram measures the electricity in your heart, and an electroencephalogram measures the electricity in your brain. In other words, we are electrical beings. Every single thought your child has, every tiny movement of their small hands, and every rhythmic beat of their growing heart is actually a complex electrical impulse, traveling at full speed through their body. The nervous system is nothing more than a network of biological wires that is incredibly assembled and incredibly sophisticated. And when there is noise or static, the music, which is basically the child's intention, simply can't be heard clearly because their brain is dealing with short circuits that force a constant discharge of energy. Imagine their mind as if it were a cathedral made of liquid crystal, a kind of technological support that needs to be clean so that the light can flow through. But right now, it turns out there's a bonfire burning inside, and the smoke, which is neuroinflammation, is clouding everything. As the chief engineer of their biology, today you are going to learn how to put out that fire and how to remove the sand that's blocking their engine. Together, we are going to restore their clarity. And if the electrical signal travels through frayed or dirty wires, it doesn't matter how much chemistry you try to adjust from the outside, because the signal still won't get through properly. At the doctor's office, it's most likely that they've told you that they have or could have a neurotransmitter imbalance, as if they were missing a chemical piece that can only be fixed by going to the pharmacy. But you see, I want us to take a step back together. What I'm going to do is look at the complete map of their internal engineering with you. And with that perspective, I'd like you to draw your own conclusions afterwards. You'll see. In order for that young child to be able to think clearly, pay close attention, or simply remain calm and focused, their brain needs to constantly send trillions of electrical signals every single second. This is just like yours or mine. To put it in a completely different way, we're not simply discussing the basic principles of chemistry here. It's fundamentally and primarily centered around electricity. And what we are looking at here is where the concept appears that will most likely change the way you understand the situation, and I'm referring to bioconductivity, that is, the ability for electricity within their body to travel without obstacles. If the wires of their nervous system are stripped because the body and brain have the equivalent of wires, if the medium through which the signal travels is dirty, or if there are external interferences, just think about it. It doesn't matter how much pharmaceutical chemistry you try to adjust from the outside with pills, because the reality is that the signal will arrive late, poorly, or simply won't arrive at all. The core of the entire problem is right there, deeply rooted inside him, and it is completely and fundamentally different from what you probably thought. And to understand this, what we have to do is break a dogma that medicine has maintained for almost a century. For decades, we believed that the brain was an isolated island. For a long time, it was believed that if you had inflammation in your knee or a digestive problem in your gut, that it would have no impact on your mental health. And that is precisely why, whenever a young child showed clear symptoms of ADHD, only their physical head was ever examined, almost as if it were a completely sealed and isolated compartment. However, this was the case until Dr. Edward Bullmore came along, who, through his research at the University of Cambridge, demonstrated that the immune system and the brain are in a state of constant, complex conversation with one another. What Bullmore did was successfully construct a bridge where everyone insisted that there was an impassable abyss. You see, when the body suffers from inflammation, it releases proteins called cytokines. And these proteins cross the brain's border and cloud the crystal clear lake that the mind should be. And he discovered that when the body is under stress or suffers from inflammation, which is what he calls the inflamed mind, the immune system actually sends signals to the brain, and those signals alter its chemistry and its electricity. And these cytokines don't just stay in the body where they originate. No, not at all. They are able to cross the brain's border, enter the brain, and completely change the environment where neurons live. In other words, Bullmore realized that to treat situations like the one we're discussing, it was necessary to go beyond serotonin. While classical psychiatry is obsessed with neurotransmitters, Bullmore looks to the blood and to the immune system. And you might ask, what does this mean? To explain it in the most straightforward and simple terms possible, it means he completely dismantled the long-standing barrier that had previously separated the fields of psychiatry from immunology. For him, treating the brain without considering the body's inflammatory state is like trying to fix a light bulb without checking if there's a fire in the house's electrical panel. And when Bullmore talks about neuroinflammation, what he's telling us is that the brain's waters have become murky. And why is that, you might ask? Well, it's very simple. Because cytokines are like a real dark dye that gets poured into that lake you have in your brain. And the light, that is, information can no longer pass through that darkness clearly. It gets scattered and lost. That smoke I was telling you about, which the child is very likely experiencing, therefore, is not just a poetic metaphor. Understand this well, it's a biochemical reality. And I'm talking to you about microchemical fires that occur between their neurons. And look, if the environment where the child has to process reality is filled with inflammatory smoke, what happens then? Well, the system, as a pure act of survival, simply decides to turn down the volume of attention, and it does so to avoid becoming overwhelmed. Distraction, thank you. It's not a failure. In reality, it's a protective measure against a noise that the child doesn't feel capable of handling. And notice how curious this is. The more powerful the child's processor is, in other words, the more intelligent the child is, the more they suffer from this smoke. A high-capacity brain is like a highly sensitive sensor that detects even the slightest vibration. It's a precision sensor. If you surround it with interference and inflammatory noise, it simply becomes almost unmanageable. Understand this. It starts to give false signals and to overheat. And so, to ensure you truly understand it from the specific perspective I'm presenting to you today, what you might think is merely hyperactivity is actually, more often than not, simply a biological system desperately trying to cool down an internal processor that is burning up inside due to significant neuroinflammation, the very same condition that Bullmore originally identified in his research. For that very reason, in order to help the child, we do not necessarily need to anesthetize their brain with medication. What we need is to understand what is causing the fire. And how can we cleanse that liquid crystal, which is their brain plasma, so that the electricity in their body can flow again with the clarity that their intelligence requires? And as you can see, in order for us to achieve this goal, we have to look far beyond the scope of psychology. We must delve into the complex realm of engineering their metals and also their internal drainage systems. Well, now that you understand that the problem is more than possible that it has been caused by interference in the signal, I imagine you are probably asking yourself the question that burns inside every parent or grandparent. And the question is, how is this possible? How can it be that a child of 7 or 10 years old is already dirty on the inside, or has problems receiving their signals? Why? And I completely understand you, because it's only logical to think that at that age the engine should be spotless, since it's the engine of a child fresh out of the factory. But to understand this, what I'm going to do is invite you to look at it from another perspective. I invite you to look at the biological clock in a different way than you probably have until now. And here you'll see, a child's cup doesn't start to fill up the day they're born. No, sir. There's a study from 2005 titled Body Burden, the Pollution in Newborns, which was conducted by the Environmental Working Group. And it left all of us who study biology with heavy hearts. This group is a prominent US nonprofit organization that is exceptionally influential in the broad field of environmental activism and the protection of public health. They are mainly dedicated to investigating and exposing the presence of toxic substances in consumer products, from food and cosmetics to tap water. Well, they carefully analyzed the umbilical cord blood of newborn babies, and what they discovered was, at the very least, deeply disturbing for any professional engineer who truly understands the human body as a highly complex and precision-tuned biological system. They discovered and identified a staggering average of 200 industrial chemicals and pollutants in every single newborn baby, and that was merely the baseline average across the group. In total, they identified 287 different chemicals, which included pesticides and herbicides, flame retardants, which are used in furniture and electronics, PFOA, which are the so-called forever chemicals. These chemicals are commonly utilized in the production of Teflon and common fast food containers and packaging. And researchers have also found traces of heavy metals like mercury and lead. And you see, the truly shocking thing about the report is that it also showed that humans already come into the world carrying a burden of contaminants before even taking their first breath outside their mother's womb. And what's more, look, out of those 287 substances, it was known that 180 are carcinogenic to humans or animals. 217 are toxic to the brain and nervous system. And 208 cause birth defects or developmental problems in laboratory tests. And it doesn't end there. On the other hand, more recent clinical research published in PubMed Central, PMC, and in PeerG, thank you, this last one, which is a journal known for its rigor in biological and medical sciences, came to show that the same thing happens with aluminum, which not only crosses the placenta, but also accumulates in fetal brain tissue. And here's something important to add. Both of the sources I mentioned require that studies to be published first undergo review by other independent experts to verify them. In other words, what I'm telling you here is not just theory. Well, in addition to all of this, we should also mention, or perhaps more accurately state, that science formally refers to this process as transplacental transfer. The placenta. It's an astonishingly engineered organ, a kind of customs checkpoint that protects the baby. But in the industrialized world we live in, it turns out it is no longer infallible. What happens throughout the course of a pregnancy, as you and I know perfectly well, is an act of biological generosity. The mother shares her nutrients with the fetus to build its bones and organs, but it is unfortunately inevitable that she also passes on a significant portion of her own toxic load, which has been steadily accumulating within her body over many decades. And that is exactly why so many newborn children are brought into this world with their cup already half full, even before they have the chance to take their very first breath. And it's very important to clarify this. It's not the mother's fault, it's simply a biological process, where the body is simply trying to dilute the toxicity. But the unfortunate reality is that in this modern day and age, the welcome gift we give to babies is much more substantial than what nature originally intended. And in the case of aluminum, the problem is especially significant because aluminum is a trivalent cation. In other words, just so you understand, it has a very strong electric charge, and in a child's brain, this charge directly interferes with the membrane potential of their neurons. But what's more, when aluminum enters, it doesn't just carry out its sabotage there, it also interferes with calcium, and calcium is the messenger that allows one neuron to communicate with another. The synapses I've talked to you about in other videos. And in this case, aluminum pretends to be calcium, but of course, it doesn't actually do the job of calcium. The ultimate consequence of this process is messages that are abandoned and left entirely unfinished, which, to put it simply, are absolutely nothing more than a series of persistent and disruptive short circuits within the system. And once this occurs, the child is born, comes into the world, but finds themselves in a world that scientists like Dr. Christopher Exley describe as a world living in the age of aluminum. And if you look very closely at the world around you, you'll find it in common soda cans, which many children especially like to drink, and also in the various colorful snack wrappers. For sandwiches, hamburgers, in the additives of ultra-processed foods, and here one clear example is the famous, sadly famous E541. You'll also find it in the utensils you use for cooking and in hygiene products. And moreover, all of these, except for the last one, are products that, as I mentioned, children and teenagers consume frequently. And look, I mentioned E541 because it is the most cunning Trojan horse of the food industry. E541, which is sodium aluminum phosphate, is a chemical additive mainly used in industrial baked goods and some processed cheeses. You see, its technical function is to act as a leavening agent. In other words, it makes cakes incredibly fluffy so they don't collapse, and in the case of cheese, it allows it to melt perfectly on a hamburger without separating from it. You're consuming it, and children are consuming it every day. They are the main consumers of these kinds of products: pastries, donuts, sliced bread, ultra-processed foods, and many more like them. As it remarkably turns out through scientific observation, when aluminum is introduced into a human body that is still developing, the filling of that glass occurs at a significantly more rapid pace than our basic human intuition would ever lead us to suggest. What I'm telling you, as you can imagine, is very concerning. And listening to me, I imagine you've also wondered, why does no one talk about this? Why hasn't my doctor told me about this? And the answer is a technical one. It turns out that conventional medicine usually looks for acute toxicity. In other words, for example, what it looks for is sudden poisoning that sends you to the emergency room. This is what current medicine is interested in. And what I'm explaining to you is a chronic bioaccumulation. A little bit today, another bit tomorrow, and so on. For years, and what's more, you'll see that measuring metals is difficult because this isn't something that usually floats around in the blood and in a standard blood test, which is the first thing they'll do when you have a problem, only what's circulating in the blood at that moment shows up, not what's hidden in the tissues or in the brain's electrical wiring. But this is where the mystery gets even bigger. Why is it that in the same family, eating the same food and living in the same house, one sibling has ADHD and the other does not? Well, to solve this mystery, I have to introduce you to another giant, Dr. Roger Williams. In the 1950s, Williams, who was president of the American Chemical Society, also discovered vitamin B5, and his work is the foundation of modern nutritional medicine. Well, you see, Williams actually coined a specific concept that at the time was considered to be incredibly revolutionary. It was the idea of biochemical individuality. He demonstrated that although we are all human on the outside, on the inside we are as different as our fingerprints. Your organs are not the same size as mine, and your enzymes do not work at the same speed as mine. And what for one person is a harmless dose of a metal, for another can be a complete collapse of their system. You see, actually, all of this that I'm telling you doesn't depend on the environment in which a person lives. It depends above all on each person's drainage system. And you might ask me, but what is the drainage system? Well, to help you visualize it, think of it as a cleaning system led by the liver and kidneys. But for that complex drainage infrastructure to work effectively, it requires the presence of some specialized genetic control valves. And one of the most critical is a gene you probably haven't heard of, called MTHFR. Don't be intimidated by the name, just think of it as a worker in charge of transforming nutrients like folic acid into cleaning tools. And it turns out there are children who are born with a typo in this gene, a kind of polymorphism, and what this typo does is make their worker operate at half speed. It's as if one child's drain were the size of a tunnel, while the other's was the size of a drinking straw. With the same exposure to metals, one stays dry while the other, however, gets flooded. Well, if you add to this slow worker the fact that the body needs to produce glutathione, then things get even more complicated. To provide a simple analogy that is easy to grasp, if the worker represents the individual gene, then glutathione acts as the detergent. In fact, it is widely recognized and celebrated as the master antioxidant, as it is known to be the most powerful molecule your body possesses to effectively capture heavy metals and safely remove them from your system. It acts like a powerful and highly adhesive magnetic force that continuously circulates throughout your cells, actively searching for and identifying metallic waste in order to escort it out of your system. If the child has a slow worker, this famous gene I'm telling you about, the MTHFR, and on top of that their body doesn't produce enough detergent, in other words, doesn't produce enough glutathione, what happens then? Well, the metallic residue doesn't simply leave. It remains firmly attached to the brain's complex electrical neural pathways. And now, I want you to connect all of this with what I told you at the very beginning, regarding the development of more intellectually advanced children. A brain. A high-capacity brain, which is something like an intellectual Ferrari, has much more intense electrical activity and an astonishing density of connections. And this is what's known as hardware hypersensitivity. Look, so you can understand it very well. The rugged engine of a vintage tractor can easily run on dirty diesel full of various impurities, because that is not a major problem. Its internal parts have a significant amount of mechanical tolerance. However, the high-performance engine of a Ferrari is a masterpiece of absolute precision engineering. If even a single tiny grain of abrasive sand manages to get into the fuel injectors, the entire engine will inevitably start to misfire, rapidly overheat, and eventually suffer a complete mechanical failure. In a gifted child, that metallic sand isn't just a nuisance, it becomes a real act of sabotage against their high-fidelity system. It generates interference, creates electrical arcs where there shouldn't be any, and above all, it overloads their processor. In short, what you've been diagnosed with as ADHD is, in reality, more than likely not a failure of intelligence, but rather a high-precision system that's out of tune due to environmental interference and a drainage system that's probably overwhelmed. So, understand this as well. We are not dealing with a child who has a manufacturing defect. No. It's not that the child doesn't want to pay attention, it's that their processor is overloaded. Due to electrical interference, they have extremely high-precision hardware that's trying to process reality at 1,000 miles an hour, while at the same time someone is sabotaging their wires. Our mission as chief engineers is not to try to make the Ferrari go slower. In other words, we shouldn't try to change the child, but rather focus on cleaning those channels in such a way that we restore conductivity. And if we do that, their power can be expressed without interference. But in order to effectively clean it all out, we first have to thoroughly understand exactly which metal has somehow managed to invade their brain and how it got there, has managed to become a squatter, and which chair or chairs is that squatter occupying. And this is what I'm going to explain to you next. But first, just a brief clarification before we continue. When I talk to you about those occupied chairs, I'm referring to them from a biophysical perspective. That is, I'm talking about cellular receptors and ion channels. Imagine that each of your child's cells is like a small room that needs instructions to function. Cellular receptors are the ears or the locks of that room, and they are on the surface waiting to receive a specific message like a hormone or a neurotransmitter to know whether the cell should activate, calm down, or get to work. And ion channels are the doors or valves through which electricity travels. When the receptor receives the correct message, the door opens to let minerals like calcium or magnesium pass through, which are the ones that actually carry the electrical charge in order to carry out the command. In a healthy system, messages come and go, and the doors open and close with absolute precision. The problem arises when there is junk or saboteurs, especially if those squatters have electrical power, because then they do two things. They either put glue in the lock, blocking the receptor, thank you, or they stand right in the middle of the doorway obstructing the channel. The end result is the same. The message of calm or focus never reaches the inside of the cell because access is physically sabotaged. And now that you can understand that there is an invisible fire, that neuron, the inflammation that Bullmore was talking about, as I was saying, we have to look for the culprit who is responsible. Because smoke doesn't just appear out of nowhere, and to find the culprit, obviously we have to go out and look. And the first thing that will surprise us when we start that search is discovering that aluminum accumulates in our bodies, and the reality is, it is widely understood that aluminum should never be present in the human body, and it is even less appropriate for it to be found inside a delicate neuron. Look, unlike essential minerals like iron, which actively transports oxygen, or magnesium, which among many other things effectively relaxes the nerves, aluminum has absolutely no known biological function in human life. There is not a single specific chemical reaction within the entire human body that requires the presence of aluminum to function. Therefore, its presence is not helpful. It is necessarily an interference. It's as if, in a perfectly engineered machine, someone threw a handful of sand into the gears. Sand is abundant in nature, but it serves no purpose inside a machine, especially one that requires precision. And why is it even less acceptable if we find it next to neurons? Well, it's very simple. Because the neuron is the cell with the most refined electrical design in the body. Its function depends on an exquisite balance of voltages, and aluminum is a metal with a very aggressive trivalent electric charge. Introducing aluminum into a neuron is like putting a powerful magnet inside a server room full of hard drives. It will distort them. It will change all the signals. And the brain, you see, has the blood-brain barrier precisely to act as a maximum security checkpoint. If aluminum is inside, it's because there has been a serious security breach or a biological deception. And what does this mean? Well, it means that our search turns it into the main suspect. In fact, you see, none of your child's cells need it to grow, to breathe, or to think. And if they have it, it is literally industrial waste that has made its way into the system. And you'll see, it turns out that the body doesn't have exit doors prepared for aluminum because evolutionarily, and until just about a century ago, we were never massively exposed to this metal, much less as we are now. Well, in addition, I have to tell you about the physics of the metal. In physics and chemistry, aluminum is not just powerful. It has a higher charge density, as I was saying, since it is a trivalent cation. It has 3 positive charges concentrated in a very small size, which gives it a much stronger electrical grip than the minerals the body actually uses to function. Aluminum comes in, pushes them aside and steals their place, their seat, as I mentioned. And it mainly does this with 3 of them. With magnesium, which is the mineral of common energy. With calcium, which is the messenger of electrical signals. And with iron, which is vital for oxygen. What I'm telling you is like, imagine a dance floor, which would be the receptors of the neuron. Thank you. Magnesium would be trying to dance gently to calm the child, but suddenly aluminum comes in with a much stronger electric charge, pushes magnesium aside, and takes its place. But since aluminum is rigid and toxic, instead of dancing, what it does is just stand there, blocking communication. And if what I just described could be considered technical suspicions, I have more information to offer you. And in this case, I'm referring to the forensic analysis of people who suffered from dementia or Alzheimer's during their lifetime. And now I'm going to talk to you about bioaccumulation. Because it turns out that aluminum doesn't just enter and then leave the body. No, aluminum stays. It's like sediment in an old pipe that eventually ends up clogging it. Dr. Christopher Exley is, without a doubt, the person who knows the most about this arsonist or saboteur. He, Exley, has spent more than 30 years at Keele University in the United Kingdom studying just one element, aluminum, and how aluminum interacts with our biology. In his most in-depth research, he found something revealing. It turns out that the brains of people who had suffered from early-onset Alzheimer's showed extraordinarily high concentrations of aluminum in the areas responsible for memory. And here, of course, a logical question arises. If aluminum is in a soda can, in a pastry, or in a deodorant, how is it possible that it ends up affecting your child's attention or your own memory? Is it that in this body of such high perfection as you describe, we don't have defenses against that? Well, yes, we do have them, and yes, it also ends up affecting your child's attention and memory. But as I was saying, not just theirs, it can also affect yours or mine. In our body, there is that maximum security checkpoint I mentioned a moment ago, the blood-brain barrier. It's a true biological wall that separates the blood from the brain. Its mission is to let nutrients through and stop intruders in their tracks. But the problem with aluminum is that it's a true master of deception. To get across that checkpoint, what it does is use what we call in biology a Trojan horse. That is, it attaches itself to a protein called transferrin, which is the one that transports the iron the brain needs. And the guards at the checkpoint, when they see transferrin coming, say, "Go ahead, you have free passage because you're bringing iron for the neurons." But what actually happens? They don't know, or they don't realize that attached to it, aluminum is sneaking into the brain as a stowaway. And once the metal has crossed that border and is inside the brain, what aluminum does is seek out its favorite target, which is myelin. And here, just so you understand, your neurons are like fiber optic cables of absolute purity, and myelin is its protective sheath, that is, it's the insulator that covers the cables and allows the signal to travel quickly, and you'll see now. It turns out that aluminum has a physical property in this environment that is terrifying. It's an insulator. The disaster it can cause in the long term is absolutely devastating. Just imagine someone opens up your computer and starts putting pieces of electrical tape or cement right on the connectors of the processor. The electricity will try to pass through to execute a command, but it will run into that grayish, sticky, insulating sediment, which is the aluminum deposited in the myelin. The consequence, as you can imagine, is obvious. The signal can't jump smoothly. It's interrupted, and it gets diverted. And since it can't flow, the energy builds up and generates heat, and that heat is the source of the micro-inflammatory fires I mentioned earlier. The system heats up, the neurons become inflamed to protect themselves, and that's why the child feels like their mind is mush, or feels like they just can't stay focused. And it's not that they don't want to pay attention, it's that their wires are experiencing a physical interference that's heating up and exhausting their system. But do not simply assume that the problem concludes at that point. This deliberate internal sabotage goes even deeper, reaching directly into the very core of cellular energy production. Here's a technical laboratory secret I want you to know about, something called coordination chemistry. In the orchestra of your cells, there is a mineral that acts as the conductor, the one who sets the rhythm, and I'm talking about magnesium. Magnesium is responsible for making sure the mitochondria produce energy, the famous ATP we've talked about so many times, and for keeping neurons calm. The technical problem is that aluminum has a size and electric charge so similar to magnesium that the body gets confused. Aluminum comes in and takes magnesium's place, but since it doesn't know how to conduct the orchestra, energy production comes to a halt. It essentially becomes an unauthorized chemical squatter, occupying the essential space and taking the rightful place of a vital nutrient, but completely failing to fulfill its necessary function. And that is exactly why the brain eventually runs out of power when the real conductor disappears. The once harmonious symphony turns into nothing but static noise. And when this happens, total chaos appears, leaving the neural pathways in a state of confusion, which in most cases ultimately results in a formal medical diagnosis of ADHD. And let me add yet another problem here. If magnesium is the conductor who keeps the rhythm and peace, calcium is the messenger that allows one neuron to communicate with the next. It's responsible for opening the gate, so that information can jump along the wire. As it happens, scientific research has demonstrated that aluminum also possesses a destructive affinity for the essential calcium channels. Just imagine that each neuron has a kind of security door that only opens when the messenger arrives with the calcium key. Well then, aluminum, with its massive electric charge, acts like an intruder and puts glue in the lock. It firmly attaches itself to those channels and effectively obstructs those pathways entirely. What is the consequence? That the message gets trapped inside. Your child's brain gives the order to pay attention or to stay still. The signal travels along the wire, but when it reaches the end to jump to the next neuron, it finds the door blocked. By whom? By aluminum. To provide you with a much clearer way to visualize and understand this concept, it is essentially like trying to make an important call with a phone that has the microphone completely disconnected and non-functional. You can talk all you want, but no matter how loud you shout, absolutely nobody can hear a single word you are saying on the other end. It is a profound physical disconnection, a deep synaptic silence, that is directly caused by a specific metal, which has effectively sidelined the essential calcium ions. Well, it's long and complicated, yes, but now you have the complete picture. With this, the infrastructure diagnosis, as I was saying, is complete. We have inflamed cables, damaged insulation, that is the myelin, a power plant without batteries, that is the mitochondria, and all of this due to a lack of magnesium, and now also a messaging system with blocked gates. The outlook is terrifying. And as you can see, the child does not have a problem of willpower. What he has is a problem of material engineering in his brain. And at this point, as the chief engineer of this biology, you will realize that there is no point in trying to calm the child if you don't remove the intruder from the system. You need a tool that is capable of entering that cathedral, to trap the aluminum and escort it out. And you might ask me, how do you remove a metal that has entrenched itself deep within the tissues? Well, yes, there is an answer to that question. And that's why I'm here with you today. And that answer is not a drug, it's an element. However, let me tell you, it's an element that nature itself designed to keep aluminum in check. And now you're going to learn about the cleansing protocol that will clear those channels, return the seat to magnesium and calcium, the key. But not only that, I'm also going to explain how you can start applying it from today. But you see, here I prefer to go step by step so I can make sure so that you yourself can understand it well. And let's start with the basics. The question in this case right now is inevitable. How do we get rid of the intruder without breaking the cathedral? Because we are talking about a system of extraordinary and immense delicacy. We simply cannot just use any harsh or aggressive industrial chemical products. No, look here. In this specific case, the true answer lies in carefully restoring a perfect natural balance. That society, that the world, broke a long time ago. And to understand this, first, you need to know something fundamental about the world we live in. Aluminum is the most abundant metal in the Earth's crust. It's everywhere. However, nature, which is very wise, never left aluminum on its own. It always placed it next to silicon. And silicon is the second most common element on the planet, right after oxygen. Aluminum is a metal, silicon is an element, and it's found in sand, quartz, and rocks. For millions of years, silicon and aluminum have lived together on Earth in perfect balance. Silicon is actually the natural guardian. That effectively keeps aluminum securely locked away and harmless. As you well know, nature always placed aluminum next to silicon, but in modern life we have separated the two, we've broken up that natural pair. And that's why aluminum now roams freely throughout our system. And the result is that in order to clean your child's or your own electrical system, we don't need a magic formula. What we need is to give the body back that companion that aluminum misses so much. But you'll see, when we try to do this, we'll face a technical detail that is actually very important. It turns out you can't just go to the beach and eat sand, which is where there's the most silica. The mineral silicon from rocks is too large, and your body simply doesn't know what to do with it. We need silicon in its living form, that is, the form in which the body is actually able to absorb it. And by this, I mean the one we call orthosilicic acid. This is the key to all the cleansing engineering we're talking about. Orthosilicic acid is such a tiny molecule that it has the necessary passport to travel through the blood and even to cross that customs checkpoint I mentioned earlier, the blood-brain barrier. It's the only one capable of entering the cathedral. And this is where what I call the rescue magnet comes into play. You see, aluminum sticks to the myelin of neurons, as I mentioned, and it attaches to them simply because it's sticky, quite literally, and because it can't find anything better to bind to while it sabotages the signal. But at the moment you introduce this liquid silicon into the system, the aluminum detects its presence and something truly amazing happens. It has such a strong chemical affinity for silicon, it likes being with it so much that it decides to let go of the neuron. It detaches from the electrical wire and clings to the silicon. By joining together, they form a new molecule that is completely inert. In reality, it is as if the silicon were putting handcuffs on the saboteur and wrapping it in a security capsule. At that moment, the aluminum stops being an insulator, stops generating heat, and stops causing interference, and simply becomes a heavy particle, which can no longer hide in the tissues. But of course, once we have successfully trapped it inside, the next logical question naturally arises. Now that we have finally trapped it there, how exactly do we go about getting it out of the formidable fortress that is the human brain? Well, this is precisely where we can take full advantage of what is known as the night shift of our biology. As you know, because I've explained it to you in other videos, while we sleep, our brain activates the glymphatic system. You see, it's as if a nighttime garbage truck starts up when we're in deep sleep. The fluid in the brain starts to circulate forcefully between the neurons and sweeps away all these silicon and aluminum complexes and sends them into the bloodstream. And that's when we can put the finishing touch on this engineering maneuver I'm telling you about. When it binds to silicon, aluminum becomes water-friendly. And in our body, everything that is water-friendly inevitably ends up in the kidneys. And this is the key. So, that metal which was blocking the attention and focus of that child ends up leaving the body through the most natural route there is, urine. Of course, as the chief engineer of your own health, you should know that what I'm telling you about is not a cleansing that can be done in just one afternoon. I'm talking about removing layers and layers of interference that have built up over a long time. This is like restoring an old painting that has spent decades accumulating soot. You have to do it patiently, stroke by stroke. That's why, you see, even though the expulsion process begins almost immediately, the clear results in mental clarity usually start to appear after about 12 weeks of consistent maintenance. And this, in short, and you can understand this perfectly well, is really a long-distance race, but it's the only safe and effective way to restore the system's original conductivity. Now that you understand how it works, regarding this chemical eviction plan, I am going to explain how to put it into practice so that you know exactly what steps you need to take starting today. And here, I imagine that, as you hear me tell you this, an idea is probably crossing your mind, and I completely understand. It would be totally logical. And the question is, how am I going to get my child or my grandchild, who already gives us enough trouble with food, to take a whole arsenal of things that will probably be necessary to achieve this cleansing? And I completely understand you, because we're not dealing with machines or robots that you can just swap out a part and they're good as new. We're talking about children, about little people who feel, who get tired, and above all, who don't want to feel sick by taking pills. That's why what I'm suggesting isn't to turn your house into a pharmacy, but to rather to integrate these tools almost invisibly into the child's daily life, with all the love and patience they need. And now you'll see, because we're going to go into detail, the first and simplest thing is water. Look at what a beautiful way to start cleansing their system without the child even noticing. Honestly, I don't think they notice at all. What I'm suggesting is that you replace their usual water with water that's rich in silica, and so you don't have to go searching. I'll give you some tips. If you're in America or you're looking for one of the waters with the highest silica content, and it's also one of the most international, look for Fiji. If you're in Europe, look for Sant'Aniol or look for Terra Waters or Volvic. If you're in Russia, you have Baikal or Lastoshka. And if you're in the East, in Japan, you have Nomusilica with 97 milligrams per liter. It's also one of the richest waters in silica in the world. And if you're in Malaysia, for example, then you have Spritzel. But I could keep listing countries and look for it. And once you have the water, the important thing is to use it for everything. For drinking, for their smoothies, and even for cooking their food. And since it's an odorless and colorless water, you won't have any issues. It will be their drinking water that quietly starts the first part of the process of removing aluminum step by step throughout the day. This is the most respectful method there is, because it doesn't invade their space or force them to do anything. It's simply drinking water. But of course, for that cleansing to be deep, we also need internal reinforcement, antioxidants, but not just any antioxidant. For this protocol, I suggest you focus on n-acetylcysteine, which is commonly called NAC, NAC. And why do I suggest it to you? It turns out that NAC is the precursor your body needs to produce glutathione. Glutathione, as I was saying, is not just an antioxidant that's simply there. In the world of biophysics, as I mentioned, we call it the master antioxidant. And this isn't just an honorary title, it has a superpower that other antioxidants don't have. Glutathione is responsible for recycling all the others. When vitamin C or vitamin E finish their job of putting out a fire, they become spent, and glutathione comes in, donates an electron to them, and puts them back into service. Without it, your cleaning system would simply stop, completely within just a few minutes. You see, imagine that glutathione is like a sulfur sponge. What makes it special is that it has a component that is extremely sticky to heavy metals and toxins. And when aluminum or mercury enter your cathedral, glutathione jumps on them, wraps them up, and neutralizes them so they can't touch your neurons. It is the true molecular bodyguard of your brain. But this is where the engineering problem comes in. It turns out that glutathione can't be taken as a pill because your stomach destroys it before it reaches your bloodstream. Your body has to produce it inside each cell. That's the only way this works. And to make it, your system needs 3 spare parts, 3 amino acids. We have plenty of 2 of them. That's not a problem, but there's one. Cysteine, which is the bottleneck, is the scarce ingredient that determines how fast the factory works. If there is no cysteine available, then glutathione production comes to a complete standstill. And that is exactly when Bullmore's thick smoke begins to billow and fill the room again, simply because the firefighters have completely run out of water. This is exactly where NAC, which is more formally known as n-acetylcysteine, becomes a critically essential and indispensable tool for maintaining your absolute sovereignty. NAC is essentially a specialized bioavailable form of packaged cysteine that your body can efficiently absorb and then deliver directly to the cellular power plant within your cells. And taking NAC is not like taking a vitamin. Don't think of it that way. It's injecting fuel straight into the cleaning factory. It's making sure your workers always have the most powerful detergent in the world, ready to degrease the processor and put out the microfires. Well, for NAC to fulfill this function as a cellular detergent and precursor to glutathione, as I mentioned, its administration must be as precise as the rest of your biological engineering. This is very important to keep in mind. But first, I'm going to make a few small clarifications about NAC that I think are important. First of all, keep in mind that NAC is a natural precursor. It is not a foreign molecule to the body, it's just another building block. And by ingesting it, you provide your body with the raw material so it can decide for itself how and where to build its defense. In the second place, it acts as a vital supplementary reinforcement for a specific amino acid that is unfortunately often lacking in our typical modern diet due to extensive industrial food processing. Therefore, it works essentially as a direct nutrient supply, and it is truly nothing more than that. And third, it is one of the most studied and safest substances in the world of supplements. It has been used for decades without showing the systemic side effects of traditional anti-inflammatory drugs. And you'll see, and this is very important in pediatrics, NAC has also been used for decades. It is frequently used as a mucolytic, so its safety profile is already very well known. However, for metal detoxification and for controlling neuroinflammation in children, the protocols need to be more subtle and, as you can imagine, must be adapted to their developing physiology. And here's an important note. As with any adjustment you make to your internal engineering, if you are under medical treatment or have a specific condition, it is always common sense to consult your trusted healthcare professional. But understand one thing, this is not about replacing a therapy. What I am proposing is to optimize the environment where that therapy is supposed to work. And one more thing, let's go back to NAC. With NAC, this is frequently the exact point at which parents come across their very first major challenge, because NAC possesses a distinct odor similar to sulfur, which is to say, it smells quite a bit like rotten eggs. And keep in mind that if you try to give a capsule and the child smells something bad, no, it doesn't smell bad, but if the child thinks it does, they will reject it, and you'll have lost the battle before you even start. So here's a tip. Look for it in powder form or open the capsule and mix it with natural orange or strawberry juice. The vitamin C in the juice not only activates the NAC, but the acidic taste will also mask that sulfur smell. Well, for a child between 6 and 12 years old, about 300 milligrams a day, which is usually half of a standard capsule, is more than enough to start noticing that the fog in their mind begins to clear. And if they are already a teenager who is starting to weigh almost as much as an adult, you can increase to 600 milligrams, which is the standard capsule size. Ideally, you should give it to them in the morning on an empty stomach or with a piece of fruit, so their body has the whole day to produce the protective glutathione it needs. But pay attention, you can't forget about the importance of magnesium in this whole process. You see, without magnesium, the silica won't be of much use. And with magnesium comes my favorite part of the protocol, because this is the moment of greatest connection with the children, the magnesium bath. If the child is small, don't even think about giving them magnesium pills because it's not necessary. Use the transdermal route, which is a true marvel of biological engineering. You see, it's very simple. Prepare a warm bath and add a couple of cups of Epsom salts. These salts are magnesium sulfate. And while the child plays with their toys or relaxes after school, what's happening is that their skin, which is an incredible absorption organ, will be absorbing that magnesium without them even realizing it. And this is the most natural way to recharge their ignition reserves and relax their nervous system before bedtime. After getting out of that bath, not only will the child be calmer, but their brain will also it provides the absolutely necessary mineral, so that during the long hours of the night, that specific nighttime cleaning system I mentioned earlier can effectively remove all of the metabolic waste that the silicon has slowly released throughout the entire day. And one more thing, don't forget what the earth gives us for free. Whenever you can, take them to the park or the beach or a garden and let them run barefoot. That direct contact of their feet with the sand, thank you, or with the damp grass is vital for discharging all that static electricity that metal generates in their head. This is like grounding a hi-fi system, so it stops making noise. For them it will be a game, but for their brain it will be a true deep breath of relief. Here, remember what I've told you before. If you live in cold areas or in the middle of a city with little access to parks, have them sit and play for a while on a grounding mat or an earth connection mat, or also look them up, buy grounding sheets for their bed because they exist. Search for them and you'll find them. And finally, to wrap up this maintenance plan, you also have to remember real nutrition. True nutrition, you need to keep in mind the importance of selenium in their diet. You see, from a biological engineering perspective, selenium is the critical component that allows your internal cleaning system not to get stuck. If silica is the agent that traps aluminum, selenium is like the spark plug that ignites the engine of detoxification in your cells. Selenium is the core of selenoproteins, which are the tools the body uses to neutralize free radicals, those sparks I mentioned at the beginning of the video, which aluminum constantly generates as it oxidizes your neurons. Without selenium, the cleaning system is out of service. Additionally, in biophysics, selenium acts as an antagonist to heavy metals. And this is very important. It turns out that it has a very high chemical affinity for toxic substances. It binds to them and forms complexes that the body can recognize and escort out. It's as if selenium puts a kind of GPS tracker on the metal so that the elimination system knows exactly what needs to be thrown away. And this is also where your role as chief engineer comes in. Brazil nuts are true selenium time bombs. A single nut, just one, can contain between 70 and 90 micrograms, that's practically 100% of what a human needs in a day. And as you well know, in a precision organism, more is not better. An excess of selenium can be toxic and can cause selenosis. That's why I recommend just one nut. And this is a high precision engineering instruction because you're giving the system exactly the replacement it needs for the engine to run without overloading it. This is the perfect natural pill because it comes with the exact dose and in a format that the body recognizes and absorbs instantly. And it also has a wonderful flavor. Give it to the child as a treat. They'll like it. If you are consistent with everything I've told you, with the water, the juice, the NaC, the salt bath, the contact with the earth, and the Brazil nut, you'll see that we're not doing an aggressive medical treatment, but rather restoring their environment. And they probably won't even realize what we're doing. In just a few weeks, you'll notice that the Ferrari you have at home starts running so smoothly that it will move you. You'll see how their attention becomes sharper and how finally that amazing intelligence they have will begin to shine without anyone or anything casting a shadow over it. Because in the end, and we must not lose sight of this, what we're looking for is not to change who the child is, but simply to take away everything that's preventing them from being themselves. And I want you, after listening to me today, to leave with a deep sense of peace. That peace that comes when you finally understand what is happening to your child or your grandchild. Those lapses that scare you, that lack of attention, that make them seem inefficient at school, or that restlessness that doesn't let them live, are not their fault. And of course, it's not your fault either. It's not that the child is broken or that their brain has decided to stop working for no reason. What's happening is simply that there is some debris in their electrical wiring. And today, you have learned something that changes the rules of the game, because you don't have to resign yourself to accepting a label that will weigh on that child for their entire life. Armed with this comprehensive understanding, you shouldn't be a mere passive spectator, just sitting back and waiting around for someone else to tell you exactly which pill to buy to temporarily suppress or sedate the child's symptoms. No, not at all. Starting from this very moment, you can make the empowered choice to become their primary chief engineer, a dedicated individual who takes the reins and deeply understands the intricate instruction manual of their unique biology. You will be the one who carries out a comprehensive maintenance plan filled with genuine love and meticulous precision, a strategy that will never merely sedate them, but will instead provide a truly sustainable and permanent long-term solution for their well-being. As the weeks go by and you remain consistent, with this protocol, you will begin to notice something truly amazing, because you will see how the aluminum, that intruder discovered by Exley, starts leaving the child's system, and little by little, you'll be able to notice how their gaze becomes clearer, how their thoughts start to flow again without getting stuck, and how that inflammatory haze finally dissipates. Never forget that the human body is a self-programmable organism. What you have just done today is regain administrator access over your child's biology. Knowledge is the code that allows you to stop patching symptoms and start precisely executing the cleansing protocol that their system is desperately asking for. Desperately. You are giving them back their sovereignty and giving them the chance for their intelligence to shine without anything casting a shadow over it. But what exactly occurs when that hazardous smoke I previously mentioned at the very beginning isn't something that only affects the youngest members of our families? What happens when it's you or the adults around you? When you feel, or when you all feel, that your minds no longer have the speed they once did. That moment when you feel that your intelligence is being sabotaged from within and you no longer seem to be in control of your own focus. In the next video of this series on mental sovereignty, I'm going to turn the focus toward us, the adults. I'm going to go deep into brain inflammation, which is the sabotage of your intelligence. And we are going to discover how the wear and tear of daily life and the accumulation of these same saboteurs we've been talking about today are dimming your clarity, and most importantly, how you can carry out your own rescue plan to regain that mental sharpness that you thought was lost with the passing of the years. But no, it's still there, just buried under debris. You really shouldn't miss that new video, because your ability to think is your most sacred tool. Well, that's where we'll wrap up for now. And as I always say, keep moving forward, always forward. And I'll be sure to read through all of your comments